the room fell silent. Not the kind of silence that settles gently, but the kind that crashes. Heavy, electric, alive. You could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights, quickened breaths of aides who suddenly forgot how to breathe normally. Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, voice low, measured, almost a calm. "Should I read your private comments aloud?" The words cut through the air like glass. For a split second, no one moved. Pam Bondi blinked, eyes narrowing in disbelief. A flicker of something, fear, maybe darting behind her polished composure. Cameras, once lazily tracking the proceedings, snapped to life. Lenses zoomed in. The room had shifted. Gasps rippled across the benches. Someone coughed to fill the void. Another shuffled papers just to make a sound. Any sound, because silence had become unbearable. Bondi tried to smile, the kind of practiced, camera-ready grin that had saved her before, but it trembled at the edges. Crockett didn't flinch. Her hands rested still on the desk, the faintest quirk of her brow signaling that she already knew what came next, that there was more. Across the room, aides exchanged frantic glances. Phones buzzed silently in pockets. Journalists, unsure of what they'd just witnessed, began typing mid-air sentences, half-formed leads. Crockett confronts Bondi. Secret remarks. Pam cleared her throat. "Congresswoman, I don't think this is the place," but Crockett interrupted softly. "Then maybe the place shouldn't be where truth hides." A wave of murmurs. The atmosphere thickened. Every movement, every breath, every side-eye glance was suddenly evidence of something deeper. Something ugly surfacing under the polished decorum. Pam tried to regain control, her tone clipped, her confidence trembling. "If you have something to say, say it." Crockett leaned back slightly, almost serene. "Oh, I will. But first, let's make sure everyone here remembers why honesty matters." The camera light blinked red. Somewhere in the back, an aide muttered, "Is this live?" It wasn't, not yet, but it soon would be. Because in that frozen moment, between power and exposure, between arrogance and accountability, history took a quiet breath before speaking loud. And to understand how we got here, we have to rewind. To the moment Pam Bondi thought nobody was listening 40-8 hours earlier. The same room had felt harmless, fluorescent, formal, forgettable. The committee's private prep session hummed with that particular brand of Washington civility, smiles like porcelain, laughter that didn't quite reach the eyes. Behind the closed doors, power sat comfortably in its chair, confident no one outside would ever know what was said inside. Pam Bondi leaned back, her voice smooth, confident, every word dipped in polished authority. "Let's be realistic," she said, tapping her pen. "Some people here love grandstanding for cameras, but this is about real policy, not posturing." The sentence sounded innocuous enough until the tone sharpened. She didn't name names, but everyone knew who she meant. A few heads turned toward Jasmine Crockett's empty chair. Then came the line, the one that would echo later like a thunderclap. "I'm all for diversity optics," Bondi said lightly, "but sometimes it feels like we're running a talent show instead of a committee." A few chuckled, uneasy but complicit. Someone shifted in their seat. Another looked down, pretending to reread briefing notes. The words hung there, smug and sterile, justified by self-assurance. Bondi sipped her coffee, unbothered. She had no idea her own echo was being quietly recorded in the memories of people who'd grown tired of pretending not to hear. By evening, whispers began to slither through hallways. Staffers talked in coded language. "Did you hear what was said? She actually said that?" You know who she was talking about, right? Jasmine Crockett found out the next morning, over a text from a junior aide. "You might want to check what Bondi said in prep." She read it once, then again, her expression unchanged, but the stillness was deceptive. She'd heard worse before. She'd fought harder fights. But this one was personal, because it wasn't just about her. It was about every woman who'd ever been told she was a prop in someone else's story, so she didn't storm into offices or issue statements. Instead, she listened, verified, quietly, methodically. She traced the remark back through the whispers until truth and rumor untangled themselves. By the end of the day, she knew exactly what Bondi had said, and she knew exactly what to do with it. That night, she sat at her desk long after everyone else had gone home. The city outside was washed in amber streetlights and faint sirens, a lullaby of ambition and exhaustion. She wrote notes in the margins of her briefing packet, small, deliberate, razor-sharp reminders, demeanor, composure, precision. She wasn't going to meet arrogance with anger. She was going to meet it with evidence. Elsewhere, Bondi was equally busy, not with reflection, but with confidence. She prepped for the next day's hearing like a performer studying her lines. She smiled into her mirror, practicing the grin that said, "I'm unshakable." Her team reassured her. Crockett wouldn't make it personal. She never did, but Crockett didn't need to make it personal. She only needed to make it public. By the time the committee convened again, tension lingered beneath the chatter, like static in the air. Cameras were positioned, chairs straightened, Microphones tested, Bondi swept in, radiant in her certainty. Crockett entered quietly, eyes steady, carrying that same calm that had unnerved more than one opponent before as they sat across from each other. The illusion of normalcy flickered. Bondi greeted her with a practiced smile. "Morning, Congresswoman." Jasmine returned it, polite, poised, honest. It was the kind of silence that carries intent. In that stillness, something invisible shifted. Truth was loading like a storm gathering over clear skies, patient, inevitable. Because when arrogance assumes safety, accountability tends to arrive unannounced. And what Pam Bondi didn't realize was that her words were about to find a microphone. Pam Bondi had built her career on confidence that bordered on theater. Long before the committee hearings, she had been a familiar face on television. The sharp-tongued prosecutor who could turn any scandal into a soundbite. She knew how to control a camera, how to lean into outrage just enough to look righteous, how to smile at the very moment her opponent began to lose composure. For years, that balance had served her well. She was polished, practiced, perfectly in command. On camera, Bondi was the embodiment of certainty. She spoke in crisp sentences, punctuating every phrase with conviction. Audiences found her persuasive, even when her arguments blurred the line between opinion and fact. "I'm just telling the truth," she would say, and that was her armor. Truth as performance, conviction as branding. To question her was to challenge the persona. She had spent decades refining, but those who had worked behind the scenes saw another side. The strategist who measured every move, who treated authenticity as a tool rather than a value. She believed power wasn't taken. It was curated, rehearsed, and projected. When producers wanted fire, she gave them inferno. When the moment called for empathy, she delivered just enough warmth to look human, not enough to risk sincerity. Her success wasn't luck. It was calculation dressed as instinct. Every appearance, every segment, every clipped exchange was a chess move in the long game of relevance. In her world, control was survival. Control was something she rarely surrendered. That's why the idea of being challenged publicly unnerved her more than any headline ever could. She'd faced journalists, attorneys, even governors, but always on her terms. She decided when to raise her voice, when to play the victim, when to pivot from facts to feelings. To her, truth was not sacred. It was flexible, a prop, adjusted to fit the stage lighting. Yet the cracks in that confidence had begun to show. Off camera, her charm sharpened into condescension. She dismissed staffers' warnings, ignored subtle shifts in tone, brushed off critics with the same phrase she'd used for years. "They're just jealous." She believed her narrative was untouchable, that her image, that golden combination of intellect and indignation, could outshine any misstep. It wasn't that Bondi didn't know she was controversial. She thrived on it. Controversy kept her relevant, kept her on the screen, kept her brand alive. She'd mastered the art of being unbothered, of smiling while others fumed. That was her power play, appearing graceful while quietly dismantling opponents from within the frame. To her supporters, she was fierce and unyielding, a woman who refused to apologize. To her critics, she was arrogance personified, someone who wielded civility like a weapon, who cloaked disdain in politeness. But to Pam, both images served the same purpose: attention. Visibility was oxygen. She never let herself forget who was watching. When the leaks about her private remarks began to circulate, she barely reacted. "They'll forget by next week," she told an aide, half laughing. "They always do." She believed her own mythology, that no one could touch her reputation, that her years of televised dominance made her untouchable. The calm of denial became her comfort zone. Still, in quieter moments, there were flickers of unease. The stray glance at her phone after a headline. The tightening of her jaw when a name like Jasmine Crockett appeared in a discussion thread. Crockett represented something Bondi couldn't control: authenticity. While Bondi had mastered the art of performance, Jasmine didn't need to act. Her poise wasn't practiced. It was earned. That contrast, though unspoken, irritated Bondi more than she would admit. In the corridors of Washington, people whispered about Bondi's confidence, the way sailors spoke about storms. Awe mixed with inevitability. She was respected, yes, but feared more. And fear has a way of turning allies into bystanders when the wind changes direction. Pam Bondi's entire career had been built on the illusion that she could not be caught off guard, that every question had an answer, every threat a counterpunch. But arrogance has blind spots. It doesn't see humility as strength. It doesn't anticipate quiet defiance. And that's exactly why Jasmine Crockett's calm defiance would strike like lightning, because arrogance never expects accountability. Long before Jasmine Crockett ever sat beneath the unforgiving lights of a congressional hearing, she was standing in the shadows of a Texas courthouse, files pressed against her chest, her heart pounding with the quiet defiance of someone who refused to be ignored. The air there was thick with humidity and hierarchy. Old names on plaques, old men behind desks, and every time she walked through those doors, someone would remind her, in tone if not in words, that she wasn't supposed to belong. But Jasmine never asked for permission to belong. She worked until belonging became irrelevant. As a civil rights attorney in Dallas, she represented people the system preferred to forget, tenants displaced overnight, young men stopped for the wrong color skin, single mothers cornered by impossible choices. She sat across from clients who had already lost faith, and she offered something small but revolutionary: attention. She listened. She asked questions that mattered. Her voice never rose, but her clarity cut through noise like light through fog. There were days when her paycheck barely covered the gas to the courthouse. Nights when she'd drive home under the faint glow of freeway signs, windows cracked just enough to keep her awake, her mind replaying testimony, evidence, injustices stacked like dominoes. She'd whisper to herself, "You can't change the world if you give up at the first closed door," and so she didn't. In those early years, she built her reputation the way people like her always have, through exhaustion and excellence. Judges learned her name not because she was loud, but because she was thorough. Opposing counsel learned not to mistake calm for weakness. Her power wasn't in how she demanded the room's attention. It was in how she made silence work for her. The first time, she was openly dismissed in court. The opposing attorney smirked, calling her young lady instead of counselor. The courtroom had laughed, not cruelly, but complacently. She smiled back, nodded once, and then proceeded to dismantle his argument with surgical precision. When she finished, she didn't look triumphant. She just said, "Thank you, counselor," in the same tone he'd used on her. The judge's gavel struck once, and the laughter never came again. That moment didn't make headlines. It didn't need to. It was one of hundreds invisible victories that stacked quietly into a legacy. By the time she entered Congress, Jasmine had already mastered something most politicians never learn: how to stay grounded while standing on fire. In the Capitol, where performance often substitutes for conviction, she remained anchored. She read every line, every clause. She didn't grandstand for the cameras, but when the cameras did find her, she knew exactly what to say. Not rehearsed, not embellished, just real. Reporters described her as formidable. Colleagues used the word fearless, but she never called herself that. She called it duty. She knew what it felt like to be underestimated, to be the only woman of color in a room full of voices explaining the rules she already knew. But she also knew how to transform that condescension into composure. Every slight became fuel. Every smirk became signal. In every moment someone mistook her patience for weakness, she reminded them, with facts, with logic, with grace, that restraint is not surrender. Her strength wasn't loud, it was deliberate. The kind that comes from fighting too many small wars that no one applauded. The kind that doesn't break because it's been tempered by doubt. When Jasmine walked into public life, she carried her roots with her. The rhythm of the South, the lessons of family, the unspoken promise to every person who'd ever been told they were too different, too emotional, too ambitious. She wore her identity not as armor, but as testimony. Proof that authenticity could survive in a room built for pretense. There was a night, years before the confrontation, when she sat on her apartment floor, campaign flyers scattered like confetti, wondering if any of it would matter. The polls were bleak, the donations modest. But she remembered the clients who'd cried when she won their cases, the kids who'd seen her speak and whispered, "She looks like me." That was enough. That was everything. So when she finally took her oath, she didn't just swear to represent her district. She swore to represent dignity, the idea that you could be strong without cruelty, brilliant without arrogance, and proud without apology. In Washington, that kind of composure stood out. Some called it refreshing. Others called it threatening. She didn't mind either label. She'd been called worse. What mattered was that people saw her and saw themselves, that somewhere, a young woman in a small town could watch her on screen and think, maybe I can do that too. That was Jasmine Crockett's quiet revolution. She didn't shout to be heard. She spoke so clearly that silence had no choice but to listen. And that's why, when she heard Pam Bondi's remarks, she didn't lash out. She prepared a masterclass in controlled exposure. The hearing room buzzed with the kind of restrained chatter that comes before a storm. Cameras clicked, papers shuffled, and beneath the orderly hum of government ritual, tension moved like an undercurrent. Pam Bondi sat poised at the witness table, her smile precise, her posture immaculate. She'd done this 100 times before. Her confidence wasn't feigned. It was muscle memory. Across from her, Jasmine Crockett sat still. Her pen rested motionless against her notes, her expression unreadable. The contrast was striking. Bondi's energy was all performance and control. Crockett's was composure distilled into silence. The chair recognized Bondi, and the microphone flicked red. Her voice filled the room, smooth and unhurried. "Congresswoman Crockett, I respect your passion, but sometimes I wonder if passion gets in the way of objectivity." She tilted her head slightly, as though offering a friendly correction. The corners of her mouth curled in a grin meant to disarm, not discuss. Jasmine looked up slowly, her gaze steady. "You're suggesting I'm not objective?" she asked, tone even, polite. Bondi leaned forward. "I'm suggesting that personal bias can color judgment. It's something we all need to be mindful of." There it was, the veiled jab, coded in professionalism. A few heads turned. One aide scribbled a note he'd never reread. Crockett nodded, taking the blow with the calm of someone who'd seen the punch coming long before it landed. "You're right," she said softly. "Bias can cloud judgment." She paused, letting the agreement settle before twisting it gently. "That's why transparency matters so much, don't you think?" Bondi blinked, surprised by the quick pivot. "Of course," she replied, but her voice tightened slightly. Jasmine's tone didn't change. It was still calm, still deliberate. "I just want to make sure we're all being transparent today, Pam." The use of her first name, casual, direct, disarming, rippled through the room like a sudden drop in pressure. A few staffers looked up. Someone stopped typing mid-sentence. Bondi's lips parted, confusion flickering for half a breath. "Excuse me?" Jasmine leaned forward, elbows resting gently on the table. "I said, I just want to be sure we're being transparent today, because I think honesty works best when it's not selective." The air shifted. Bondi's practiced poise began to fray at the edges. She straightened her papers, glanced toward the committee chair, and tried to laugh. "Congresswoman, I'm not sure what you're implying," Crockett cut in, voice soft but surgical. "I'm not implying anything. I'm referring." A beat. Bondi froze. "Referring to what?" The silence stretched thin. Cameras refocused. The sound of a pen rolling off a desk startled someone in the back. Crockett didn't answer right away. Instead, she studied Bondi the way one studies a chessboard. Not to react, but to reveal. "Let's start simple," she said finally. "Do you believe what's said behind closed doors should match what's said here, in front of the public?" Pam hesitated. I believe in context," she said, recovering quickly. "Private conversations are often mischaracterized when taken out of context." Jasmine finished for her. "Yes, I've heard that word before." The tone wasn't mocking. It was measured. But something in her delivery made Bondi falter. The smug confidence began to harden into defensiveness. Crockett continued, still calm, still composed. "Because I think the public deserves to know whether the words we use in private carry the same integrity as the ones we deliver for the record." Bondi tried to smile again, but it didn't reach her eyes this time. "Congresswoman, if you have something to say, I suggest you say it plainly." Crockett tilted her head. "I plan to. I just wanted to make sure the cameras were ready first." A tremor of movement ran through the crowd, a shifting of energy, almost audible. The camera operators, sensing the change, zoomed closer. Even the chair of the committee leaned forward, eyes darting between the two women. Jasmine glanced briefly at her notes, but didn't read from them. When she looked up again, her eyes were steady, unflinching. "It's interesting," she said softly. "You've spoken about accountability for years, about honesty and standards. But sometimes I wonder, do those standards apply equally when the doors are closed?" Pam exhaled sharply through her nose, a small tell she couldn't control. "Are you accusing me of something?" Crockett's reply was simple, quiet, devastating. "I'm giving you the chance to answer that yourself." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. No one moved. Pam shifted in her chair. Her eyes darted briefly, toward her aides, then back to Jasmine, whose calm was unbreakable. "I have nothing to hide," Bondi said finally, her voice thin, her confidence brittle. Jasmine nodded once, as though acknowledging a confession. "Good," she said. "Then I'm sure you won't mind a little transparency." The cameras caught it. The flicker of realization crossing Bondi's face, the tightening of her jaw, the faint tremor in her fingers as she adjusted her microphone. Crockett didn't press further. Not yet. She sat back, letting the silence grow, her patience louder than any accusation. In that moment, the power dynamic flipped completely. Bondi's confidence had become defense, her practiced smile now armored that no longer fit. Crockett hadn't raised her voice, hadn't broken decorum. She hadn't needed to, because control doesn't always look like dominance. Sometimes it looks like stillness. And just when the room began to breathe again, Jasmine glanced up once more, the trace of a knowing smile at the corner of her mouth. But no one was ready for the next line, the one that would break the internet. For a long moment, the hearing felt suspended, the kind of silence that arrives before revelation. Every microphone gleamed beneath the ceiling lights. Every face waited for the next line that might either explode the room or dissipate the tension entirely. Jasmine Crockett lifted her eyes from her notes. "You know, Pam," she began, her tone even conversational. "You've said so much about integrity these past few days, about transparency, about being honest when the cameras are off." Bondi smiled, cautious, rehearsed. "Of course, that's what leadership is, isn't it?" Crockett nodded once. "I agree. Which is why I found your comments from the prep session a little enlightening. Linked. I'm sorry." "You remember," Jasmine continued, "the discussion 48 hours ago. You said something about diversity, about how this committee sometimes feels like quote, a talent show rather than a policy-making body. The sentence dropped into the room like a stone into still water. For a moment, there was no reaction, only the slow widening of eyes, the subtle intake of breath. Then came the soft murmur from the back benches, the quick shuffle of reporters leaning forward. Pam Bondi's expression froze in a half-smile. I think that's being taken out of context. Jasmine didn't blink. Context is important, so let's provide it. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. You said it after praising the committee's optics. You implied that people like me are part of those optics. The sentence was precise, surgical. A reporter's pen clattered to the floor. An aide looked down, pretending to search for papers that weren't lost. The chair of the committee cleared his throat, but didn't intervene. Pam's fingers tightened around her pen. Congresswoman, I don't appreciate mischaracterizations. That was a private discussion, not meant for public misinterpretation, not meant for accountability. You mean, Jasmine replied softly, a ripple of sound? Not quite applause, not quite shock, ran through the spectators. The tension had shifted fully now. Bondi's confidence had drained into visible irritation, her tone sharp around the edges. I think this is inappropriate, she said, forcing steadiness. Dragging personal comments into an official hearing? Personal comments? Jasmine interrupted, still calm. You're a public servant. There's no such thing as personal when your words shape public trust. Pam opened her mouth, then shut it again. The cameras zoomed closer. One caught the precise moment her polished certainty cracked. Another lingered on Jasmine's face, serene, unbothered, as if she'd been waiting years for this exact breath in time. Crockett leaned forward slightly. Pam, people look to you as an example. They listen when you speak about fairness, about justice, about character. But when those same people hear that you call diversity a show, how do you think that makes them feel? Pam exhaled sharply. You're twisting my words. No, Jasmine said, voice steady as a gavel. I'm untwisting them. It was a master class in control, each syllable measured, each pause calculated to let the audience fill the silence with their own disbelief. Every second felt cinematic. The flicker of camera lights, the subtle tremor in Pam's hand, the growing rhythm of whispered reactions. Crockett continued, her tone almost sympathetic. You see, I understand frustration. I understand that sometimes we speak differently when we think no one's listening. But I also believe the measure of character isn't what we say in front of cameras. It's what we say when we think the microphones are off. Pam shook her head quickly. That's not fair. You're cherry-picking, Pam, Jasmine said, interrupting her again. It's not harshly, but firmly. The way a teacher interrupts a student who's trying too hard to talk over the truth. You had a choice that day, to speak with respect or to speak with ego. You chose the latter. I'm just holding up the mirror. There was a faint collective exhale. Bondi's team exchanged anxious looks. A reporter mouthed wow toward a colleague, and then Jasmine stopped speaking. She simply stared, eyes unwavering, letting the silence do the rest. The stillness stretched. Every rustle, every camera click, every nervous cough became part of the moment's soundtrack. Pam finally looked away. In that single gesture, that break of eye contact, the hierarchy reversed. Jasmine didn't smile, didn't gloat. She just folded her notes and placed them neatly on the table. The chair hesitated. Congresswoman Crockett, do you wish to? No, she said quietly. I think I've said enough. But the internet decided she hadn't. Within minutes, clips of the exchange began spreading. A single 15-second video, Jasmine's line, I'm untwisting them, hit social media first. Captioned simply, Crockett calls out Bondi. Then came the edits. The remixes, the reaction videos. A TikTok split screen compared Bondi's smirk before and after the quote. Another slowed the footage, replaying the moment Jasmine leaned forward. The faint glint of resolve in her eyes. #Crockett vs Bondi trended within the hour. Comments poured in by the thousands. This is how you dismantle arrogance with grace. Every woman who's ever been talked down to in a meeting just stood up and cheered. She didn't shout. She didn't rage. She just told the truth and let silence finish the sentence. Cable networks looped the clip between debates about decorum and transparency. Pundits called it a political clinic, a lesson in composure under fire. Some of Bondi's supporters admitted, privately, that she'd been caught off guard by someone who refused to play her game. And through it all, Jasmine Crockett didn't issue a statement. She didn't post. She didn't retweet the praise. The moment belonged to itself. Back in the committee room, as staffers began to disperse, Pam Bondi sat motionless, staring at her reflection in the turned-off monitor. For years, she'd controlled her image, shaped her story, written her own script. But today, someone else had taken the pen, done it without ever raising her voice. Jasmine stood, gathering her papers with the same calm she'd arrived with. As she walked out, a reporter called after her, Congresswoman, was that planned? She smiled faintly. Truth doesn't need rehearsal. Outside, the hallway lights flickered against the marble floor. She paused only once, glancing back toward the chamber door. Behind it, The echo of her words still lingered, reshaping reputations in real time. Every generation has its moments of reckoning, those quiet, seismic seconds when truth refuses to stay buried. This was one of them. And as the headlines multiplied, as the hashtags climbed, as the country watched and replayed and debated, one question grew louder than the rest. If honesty sounds like this, what else have we been missing in the noise? But once the camera stopped rolling, the real storm began. The clip didn't just go viral, it detonated. Within hours, timelines across the country pulsed with Jasmine Crockett's voice, looping endlessly, dissected frame by frame. The moment she said, "I'm untwisting them," became a mantra, a rallying cry. A meme layered over music, reaction shots, and cinematic edits that turned a congressional hearing into a cultural event. TikTok was first. A user posted a slow-motion version, overlaying the sound of a heartbeat and the caption, "Every woman who's ever had to stay calm when someone tried her." In minutes, it hit 500,000 views. By morning, millions were syncing it to trending audios. Boss energy, don't play with her. Grace under fire. Twitter followed suit, its algorithm catching fire with hashtags that refused to cool. Hashtag Crockett vs Bondi. Hashtag untwisting the truth. Hashtag stay calm, speak loud. Screenshots of Pam Bondi's stunned face became reaction templates for every kind of hypocrisy. One meme paired her expression with the text, "When receipts show up uninvited." Another showed Jasmine's composed stare with the caption, "The face of facts." Cable news networks scrambled to catch up. Morning anchors replayed the clip like it was a sports highlight, freeze-framing Jasmine's steady gaze, circling Bondi's flustered gestures. "Look at the contrast," one analyst said, pointer in hand. "Calm versus chaos. Precision versus panic." On one channel, a conservative commentator tried to reframe it. Bondi was ambushed, he argued, voice taut with indignation. Private comments shouldn't define public service. But even as he spoke, a split screen showed Crockett's quote trending with over 6 million mentions. Another panelist countered softly, "Accountability doesn't care about convenience." In the background of this media hurricane, something more profound was happening. The internet, chaotic, fickle, endlessly distracted, had found a new symbol. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just a congresswoman anymore. She was an archetype. Calm power, earned composure, proof that dignity could trend. Fan edits appeared on Instagram Reels and YouTube Shorts. Dramatic music, Aiden's, overlays of fire and storm clouds. The tone wasn't angry, it was triumphant. In comment sections, people wrote things like, "She didn't just win an argument. She reclaimed the room. This is how we fight, with truth, not tantrums. My daughters are watching this on repeat." Even late-night hosts joined in. One joked Pam Bondi tried to spin her way out of it, and Jasmine Crockett spun her right into a master class. Another called it the Congressional equivalent of a chess checkmate, delivered with a smile. But beneath the humor was something deeper. A collective exhale from people who'd spent years watching arrogance go unchecked. This moment, brief as it was, felt like balance being restored. A reminder that grace could still cut sharper than ego. In think pieces and op-eds, writers drew parallels to history. The calm firmness of civil rights leaders. The unflinching resolve of women who changed systems simply by refusing to back down. Crockett's silence was as loud as her sentence, one columnist wrote. In a time when outrage is currency, she reminded us that control is power. Meanwhile, Bondi's camp floundered. Her spokesperson issued a vague statement about misinterpretation and respectful disagreement. It only made things worse. Screenshots of the statement were shared alongside clips of the hearing. Every contradiction highlighted in neon by online sleuths. By the second day, Pam's PR team was trending, not out of sympathy, but mockery. Reporters camped outside Capitol offices, trying to catch reactions from other members of Congress. Some demurred. Others smiled knowingly. One senator chuckled, "I'd say Jasmine handled herself better than most of us could." And then came the ripple beyond politics. Teachers played the clip in debate classes. Motivational speakers referenced it in podcasts. A black-owned t-shirt brand dropped a line that read, "Untwisting since day one." The first batch sold out in an hour. It wasn't just about Jasmine versus Pam anymore. It was about every workplace, every boardroom, every classroom where composure had been mistaken for weakness. It was about finally seeing calm intellect win and knowing it was possible. For days, the internet lived in a loop, rewinding Jasmine's line, replaying the silence that followed, watching Bondi's eyes flicker downward as if realizing, too late, that her authority had just evaporated. That silence became the most quoted part of the clip. The second before control changed hands, a viral tweet summed it up perfectly. That's the sound of accountability landing. By day 3, the story had crossed into mainstream culture. Talk shows debated it. Podcasts analyzed the rhetorical precision. One linguistics professor broke down Jasmine's cadence. explaining how I'm untwisting them carried both correction and compassion. A phrase that diffused hostility while affirming truth. Celebrities joined in. A-list actresses posted the clip with fire emojis. Activists called it the template. Musicians sampled Jasmine's voice. It wasn't just a viral moment. It had become an aesthetic. Controlled power was suddenly in, and yet, as the digital applause swelled, Jasmine herself remained quiet. Her only public comment came during a brief hallway interview. I think people are just tired of watching arrogance go unchallenged. I didn't expose anyone. I just told the truth. That line, I just told the truth, became its own echo, traveling alongside the original, quote, simple but profound. It was everything her supporters wanted to believe, that dignity could still win in a world addicted to noise. But even in the celebration, another current ran beneath the surface. Curiosity, maybe even apprehension. Because while the internet was busy turning Jasmine into a symbol, Washington was recalibrating. Behind closed doors, alliances were shifting. Emails were being drafted. Reputation managers were on overdrive. As one political strategist muttered on live TV, viral moments are great, until the establishment decides to respond. And that's when the real intrigue began to build. Because beyond the memes and the noise, one question remained. What does this moment mean for America? When the noise finally faded, when the hashtags cooled and the edits slowed, what remained wasn't the clip or even the confrontation. It was the feeling, that quiet, reverberating pulse of recognition that dignity had stood its ground, and the world had noticed. In the end, Jasmine Crockett didn't just expose a comment. She revealed a truth that had been waiting beneath the surface for years. That truth doesn't need a microphone to matter. It doesn't need to roar. It just needs to stand still and refuse to bend. Because this was never really about Pam Bondi, or even about Jasmine Crockett. It was about the kind of America we want reflected back at us. Do we celebrate polish over principle? Do we reward those who talk loudest, or those who stand calmest when the room shakes? Every viral moment is a mirror, and this one showed a reflection many had forgotten existed. Strength wrapped in composure. Justice voiced without vengeance. Jasmine's power came not from outshouting arrogance, but from outlasting it. That's the paradox of truth. It doesn't fight for dominance. It simply endures until the noise exhausts itself. And when it finally echoes, it sounds like clarity. In her restraint, people saw themselves. The quiet workers who bite their tongues in meetings. The activists who choose persistence over spectacle. The young women who've had to prove their competence twice before being heard once. Her silence between sentences spoke louder than most politicians' monologues. It said, you don't need to mimic power to confront it. You just need to hold your ground. And maybe that's what made the moment transcend politics. It wasn't a partisan victory, it was a human one. It reminded viewers that integrity, once considered ordinary, had become extraordinary again. That telling the truth with grace shouldn't be rare enough to trend. Commentators tried to define it. A masterclass in communication. The perfect viral takedown. A generational shift in tone. But underneath the analysis was something simpler. Gratitude. People were grateful to see composure win. To see intellect, not as a prop, but as a force. Because somewhere along the line, America had started confusing confidence with cruelty. We'd begun mistaking performance for principle. And Jasmine Crockett, in one moment of unflinching calm, reminded the nation what real power sounds like when it isn't performing for applause. It sounds steady. It sounds certain. It sounds like truth without ego. And as the dust settled, that message lingered longer than any meme. Parents replayed the clip for their kids, saying, see how she didn't have to yell to win? Teachers discussed it as an example of leadership. Ministers quoted it from pulpits. It became something larger, not a scandal, but a standard. Pam Bondi's name faded from the headlines, as outrage always does. But Jasmine's moment stayed not because of virality, but because it answered a craving deeper than politics, the longing to see integrity rise above arrogance, even just for a second. That's what this story was really about. Who we choose to become when the spotlight finds us. Whether we reach for image or for honesty, whether we defend power or speak truth to it. The world moves fast now. Scandals cycle by the hour. But every so often, something breaks through. Not because it's loud, but because it's right. Jasmine Crockett didn't trend because she was clever. She trended because she reminded people that calm courage is still possible, that dignity still matters, that the American mirror, however cracked, can still reflect honor when someone stands before it without flinching. Because in every generation, someone has to remind power what accountability looks like. The room had fallen silent once before. In that instant when Jasmine Crockett asked, should I read your private comments aloud? But now, after everything that followed, that silence meant something different. It wasn't shock anymore. It was recognition, the kind that settles over a crowd when truth has finished speaking. Pam Bondi had come armed with confidence. with practiced charm and the assumption that power protects itself. But Jasmine came with something stronger: composure. The kind that doesn't waver, doesn't flinch, doesn't need volume to command respect. And in the end, it was that calm that cut through every layer of pretense and exposed what arrogance always forgets: the truth doesn't serve the powerful, it serves the patient. That's why the moment resonated so deeply. It wasn't just about one debate or one viral clip. It was about a shift, a reminder that authenticity, once seen as vulnerability, has become the new revolution. That integrity still lands harder than ego, and that dignity, though often quiet, always wins the long game. So if you felt something watching that exchange, if you've ever stayed silent while arrogance filled the air, or ever wished for the right words to cut through the noise, remember this: you already have them. Truth doesn't need permission to be heard. It just needs courage to be spoken. Because every time someone like Jasmine Crockett stands her ground, she opens the door for the rest of us to do the same. The lights dim, the cameras turn off, but the echo remains steady, unshaken, undeniable. If you believe in calm courage over loud corruption, share this story and subscribe for truth told with courage, because every voice deserves its mic drop moment.